Chapter 20, Chapter 20 Chapter 20, Celadon City. So have you picked a name yet? Asked Brock, leaning up against his dozing Rahorn and relaxing in the afternoon sunshine. Or are you just going to call it Munchlax? I haven't decided, Misty answered. Sitting against Arcanine and playing with the Munchlax she had taken in a few days earlier, Misty held a couple of twigs over the blue Pokemon's head, flicking them about as the Munchlax lazily tried to snatch them from her grip. When it finally succeeded, mostly because Misty let it, the girl pointed the little Pokemon towards a nearby bush and patted it on the rear. Without hesitation, the Munchlax waddled over to the bush and began tearing the plant apart, devouring it one branch at a time. Standing off in the clearing, with Pikachu resting atop his head like the hat Ash had lost in his fight with Jessie over Fuchsia, helped Pidgeot stretch her wing out to one side. Her progress had been faster than the young trainer had ever anticipated, and already Pidgeot could utilize almost half of her full range of motion. If she tried to apply her full strength, of course, the bird quickly found that her wings simply couldn't obey her, so she settled for Ash's amateur physical therapy, content for now and cooing happily to be out of her Pokeball. Arcanine hadn't taken its eyes off the newest Pokemon added to the party, however the big canine's anxiety over the Munchlax's arrival had quickly faded to mild curiosity. Pikachu on the other hand, had yet to adapt, and watched the Munchlax like a mouse would a lazy cat.
Grandpa told me about this cousin of his once, said Ash, turning from Pidgeot to address Misty, a big guy who trained a Rhydon. His name was Ozymandias or something like that, and when he was working with Grandpa at Indigo Plateau the two of them were ambushed by a Snorlax. Ozzy's Rhydon managed to beat it almost single-handedly and drive it away from the city. Given what you're trying to do, that seems appropriate.
Misty mulled the name over in her head for a second.
That's a long word, she said. What about something shorter? Ounce maybe. Sounds good to me,
Ash shrugged, putting his hands behind his Pokemon's shoulder and helping her stretch her wing back. The group of trainers picked up their journey later in the day and decided to ride through the night. Given their proximity to Celadon and its famously pleasant weather, Misty and Brock had both suggested that the party travel during the morning, evening, and early nighttime hours to take advantage of the napping opportunities provided by the afternoon weather. Ash thought the idea seemed silly and unnecessarily risky, but couldn't argue with the results. Something about the air as they neared Celadon seemed to set the young gym leader almost completely at ease. A feeling he was neither used to nor inclined to enjoy. Traveling towards the dipping sun, Brock informed Ash and Misty that if they made good time they could reach Celadon by late the next morning. They'd have to travel across the city to get to the Pokemon Center, but that would take them directly past Celadon's department store, a location Misty was all too eager to visit.
We're not made of money,
Ash reminded her as the girl hung onto his waist, sitting behind him on Arcanine and detailing all of the stores she planned to visit.
So don't go too crazy. I won't, don't worry, said Misty. Besides, I'm not planning on buying much of anything at all. Maybe some new boots, a belt, a new backpack, and a cloak. I just want a few things for the road. The rest will all be nothing but window shopping.
She sighed and rested her cheek on his shoulder.
But, it will be nice to be back in civilization. It'll be even nicer when we can get back to Vermilion and stay there for a while.
She mused as Arcanine plodded along next to Brock and Rahorn.
How long is a while?
Asked Ash.
We just spent a whole year in one place. I know,
said Misty, watching as the forest slowly rolled by.
But we were always working and always worrying about the next crisis that might pop up. There was always the threat of Team Rocket coming back or something going wrong. I mean, I can't wait until things calm down, once we beat Team Rocket and can settle down for a long time.
Brock smirked, ready to comment, but Ash beat him to it.
I don't think I'll ever completely settle down, said the young trainer. Peace and quiet are nice, but there's always going to be more work to do. There will always be ways we can work to make the world a better place and ways we can keep pushing things forward. I know that, said Misty. But don't you think it would be great if, once Team Rocket is taken care of, we could just relax?
Ash shook his head.
That might work for some people, he said. But I don't think it would ever make me happy.
Misty bit her lip and leaned up a little.
What do you mean by that?
She asked. Ash shrugged and looked up at the sky.
The whole time we were in Vermilion, you're right, we were always working and always trying to put out the next fur before it popped up. Not a minute went by that we were hanging on by any more than a shoestring, and it was tiring, hard, beleaguering work, but I loved it. The challenge was great to overcome, and the reward of seeing the city beginning to prosper again made it all worth it. But then towards the end, things started to get calm again. The fires started coming less and less often and everyone started to get the sense that things were going to be okay.
Brock laughed once.
Well, isn't that a good thing?
He asked.
Hell, you have no idea what I'd give for that feeling in pewter. It's a good thing,
said Ash half-heartedly.
But I went to Vermilion to beat Surge and get the recommendation I needed for the Elite Four, which I did. We stayed on to help fix the city, which we did. So once the city was on the right track, what was I doing there except taking up space? Helping people,
Misty pointed out,
and taking it easy. Maybe,
said Ash.
But why would I want to take it easy when there's so much to be done elsewhere? Because you earned a break,
said Misty.
But I don't want one,
said Ash. As Ash and Misty began going back and forth on the virtues and shortcomings of taking a rest from trying to save the world, Brock steered Rehorn to the head of the group and focused on leading the party west. He listened in on fragments of the conversation behind him, amusedly wondering why Misty wouldn't just come out and say that she wanted to settle down.
That,
Ash muttered, standing beside Misty and Brock, red light flickering off his eyes and casting a crimson glow on his features,
is not what I wanted to see.
The sun had yet to rise, but the sky to the west had already filled with dull red light, choked as it was by pillars of smoke rising out of Celadon City. The metropolis, densely packed as it was, covered the entire floor of the fertile valley between Saffron's hilly terrain and the mountains separating it from the coast, though the legendary beauty of the city's lights paled in the wake of the riot gripping the metropolis. From their vantage on the steep hill half a mile to Celadon's west, the party could see the dozen unorganized mobs roving like ants through the city, hurling projectiles that set buildings alight and scattered the riot police who were clearly on the defensive. Brock held Rehorn's stubby reins tightly as he reared her around.
Still want to go shopping?
He asked, pointing at the city's 25-story department store. The shopping center, Celadon's signature structure, smoked and fumed like a giant torch stuck in the middle of the city as its upper levels burned and filled the sky overhead with an ominous rusty hue. Ash turned and faced his partners.
Well, what do we do?
He asked.
We could skip this and go straight to Saffron,
said Misty.
Where's Erica?
Asked Brock, scanning the scene.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't gym leaders supposed to quell unrest like this? Maybe she tried,
said Ash.
Keeping order in all of this might be hard to do without using lethal force.
The three trainers watched for a half an hour longer as the mobs gained even more control of the city and the police began pulling back as far as the gym in the southern district. Ash got down from Arcanine and pulled a Pokeball from his belt, holding it a moment longer. Over the next 20 minutes the distinct groups of rioters began congealing into one mass as the mobs met in the streets north of the gym. Clear battle lines began to form as a temporary lull in the chaos gave both sides time to prepare for the coming onslaught.
Well, I don't know what started all this,
said Ash, snapping open the Pokeball and releasing Charizard in a flash of light,
but I don't see any Pokemon on either side down there and the riot's getting out of hand. Where are you going?
Asked Misty as Ash handed her Pikachu and swung himself into Charizard's saddle. Ash strapped his legs to the Pokemon's side with the heavy leather bands as Charizard snarled its disapproval.
To do a little crowd control,
he tapped Charizard's flanks with his heels and lurched into the sky with a beat of the Pokemon's sprawling wings. Scanning the streets beneath him as Misty and Brock disappeared into the background, Ash took stock of the crowds advancing on the gym with shouts and screamed profanities. Molotov cocktails flew from the mob into the line of police, most crashing against riot shields and bursting with little effect on the ground before the officers, but a few arced over the wall of men and washed several of the police in flames. You, Ash directed his thoughts at the ghost hiding in his backpack. Stay put and don't do anything. Immediately Ash felt Haunter's disappointment echo across their empathetic link, though the ghost promised to remain concealed.
We're not trying to kill anyone,
Ash said, watching as the police threw back the first onset of the rioters with a heave of their shields.
Just try to scare the hell out of them.
He angled Charizard for the gap between the battle lines and lurched in his saddle as the Pokemon flared its wings, leveled off, and landed with a tremendous roar directly between the rioters and the police. Charizard reared back on its hind legs, standing well over twice the height of the tallest man present, and snapped its wings out at its sides. With another bellowing roar, the Pokemon threw its head back and spat a column of flame into the sky. Holding himself up in the saddle and watching with a measure of satisfaction as the line of rioters broke instantly and ran back to put some distance between themselves and the dragon, Ash spurred Charizard with a tap from his heels. The winged Pokemon leaped forward, landing just behind of the still retreating line of rioters, and lashed out with his wings to sweep the feet out from under several people in the mob. As the entire crowd began to scatter before the dragon, Ash reined Charizard back. The Pokémon again stood up to its full height and arched its neck over the mob. A third time it roared, belching out a cloud of acrid smoke that overtook and nauseated a dozen fleeing people.
Good,
said Ash, watching as the rioters scattered for their lives.
No casualties.
He scanned the street and, finding no bodies, turned to the line of police. Flinching, Ash resisted the urge to wheel Charizard around, seeing that from the line of shields more than a dozen armored men, armed with crossbows, had stepped forward and trained their weapons on him.
Step down and surrender,
shouted one of the officers near the middle of the line, not lowering his weapon.
Or we will fire on you.
Ash held his ground and sat up taller in the saddle.
My name's Ash Ketchum, he responded, Vermilion's gym leader. I'm here to see Erica.
Several of the men with the crossbows looked amongst themselves but held their weapons on Ash.
I don't give two shits if you're Lance himself,
answered the first policeman, who Ash could now see wore a uniform more decorative than functional.
You violated Celadon law by bringing a Pokémon inside the city limits without the mayor's consent. You are hereby placed under. That will be quite enough, Captain,
someone shouted from behind the line of officers.
Lower your weapons, immediately.
All of the armed men quickly stepped aside and turned their crossbows away as a figure, dressed in black and gold Oyorowi armor and sporting a bronze mask made in the likeness of a snarling demon, strode to the front of the line. Carrying a strung bow slung over a shoulder and long sword in one hand, the figure reached up and undid one of the straps holding the mask in place. The bronze facade dropped to one side, revealing the young woman beneath as she faced Ash and looked between him and his Charizard.
Well, get down from there if you want to talk,
shouted the woman, sheathing her sword and putting her hands on her hips.
And if you don't put away your Pokémon the police will have to arrest you.
She turned around and addressed the ranking officer in the line of police, speaking too quietly for Ash to hear. Ash undid the straps holding his legs in the saddle and stepped down, patting his Pokémon's neck and returning Charizard to its Pokéball. Fastening the little orb to his belt, he crossed the short distance between himself and the woman in the ornate armor. He extended his hand.
Ash Ketchum,
he introduced himself, meeting her gaze as she turned back to him.
Erica. Lady Erica, if you would please,
she said, her tone softening without growing warmer.
Or simply Milady if you would prefer. You are in my city after all.
Ash inclined his head.
Then you'll have to forgive me,
he said, retracting his hand.
But I'm here on business. Do you have time to talk?
Erica looked around as the line of police reformed behind her, setting their shields in place as if they were ready to receive another attack.
The riot has died down for now,
she said, turning and walking through the officers, who parted to let her pass.
We've been granted a reprieve in part because of you, so I'll receive you in a moment.
Ash followed behind her, taking a deep breath and steeling himself. She's even more of a stuck-up princess than I'd heard, he thought. Celadon's gym, from the outside, could barely pass for a defensive structure at all. Taking up almost a whole city block and constructed from panes of glass set in what Ash thought to be a flimsy-looking metal frame, the main structure of the building consisted primarily of a greenhouse filled to the brim with all manner of exotic plants. It wasn't until Ash stepped through the front doors that he saw the true purpose of the densely packed foliage. Hidden behind the panes of glass, which were themselves more than 6 inches thick and supported by massive oaken pillars, the foliage obstructed all outside view of the wooden fort constructed in the center of the expansive complex.
This is where you must wait,
said Erica as they approached the fort's gate. The heavy doors swung open on creaking hinges and 5 men dressed in armor similar to their mistresses stepped between Ash and the other gym leader.
I'll send for you when I have time. Of course.
Ash crossed his arms and waited as the heavily armed men escorted Erica inside the fort, closing the gates behind them. The young trainer sighed and looked around at the jungle all around him. Several minutes passed before he realized how profoundly quiet the greenhouse seemed. Listening as closely as he could, Ash could hear no sounds except the dull hum of activity within the fort.
There's not a single Pokémon in here,
he mumbled, the revelation contrasting violently with the encounter he had expected from Erica's reputation as an animal lover. Almost half an hour went by before any sound at all caught Ash's attention. He turned as Misty and Brock, announced by the shifting of the crisp grass beneath their feet and escorted by a pair of police officers, made their way to him. Before any of the trainers could say a word, Pikachu leapt up into Ash's arms and, chittering angrily, batted him on the nose.
I know,
Ash groaned as the little yellow Pokémon climbed up onto his head again.
And this is really the last time I'll leave you behind.
Pikachu nodded as if to confirm the thought, before sitting up and scanning the surrounding forest.
So how'd it go?
Misty asked.
Did you convince her to see things our way? Not exactly, Ash answered, reaching up to scratch Pikachu behind the ears, instantly winning back the Pokemon's affection. I haven't actually gotten a chance to talk. She went inside and said she'd see me when she had time. Ah, well, said Brock. That's Erika for you. Gym leader or not, she's still technically a princess and she knows it. How is she a princess? Asked Ash. We never really covered that. It goes back to Lavender's old empire, began the gym leader. After they migrated here from the east and set up the city of Lavender, they began expanding westward by setting up castles and forts. Those gradually grew into the three core cities of Saffron, Celadon, and Lavender itself. When Lavender collapsed, the responsibility of leading Celadon and Saffron fell to each city's regent. Even though the monarchies quickly gave way to more democratic governments, Erika is still from that line, so if nothing else, she has a lot of money and influence. And the attitude to back it up, said Misty. Speaking of, said Brock, Ash, what's all this about it being illegal to have Pokemon within the city limits without the mayor's say-so? Did you hear anything about that? Ash nodded. Yep, he answered. Using Charizard to save the cops from the mob earned me a pretty cold welcome. All three trainers turned as the heavy hinges creaked and the wooden gate slowly opened. On the other side, 4 soldiers wearing identical armor made of strips of lacquered wood stood at attention. Carrying tall spears and small shields that clinked as the soldiers began to move, they stepped forward and the tallest of the men, a soldier in red armor, turned to Ash. Lady Erika will see you, he said, voice muffled and distorted by the bronze demon mask concealing his features. The 3 trainers stepped forward, but stopped cold when all 4 guards took a quick step back, raised their shields, and lowered their spears. Misty and Ash both jumped away from the soldiers, but Brock stood his ground. The older gym leader grimaced and turned to Ash. I think what they mean, said Brock, is that Erika will see you, Ash specifically. Lady Erika mentioned only one visitor, said the guard in the bronze mask, still pointing his weapon at Brock's chest. Ash glanced between Brock and Misty, but walked forward to the gate as Brock stepped back. All 4 guards lowered their shields and straightened up. I'll be back, he said, handing a perturbed Pikachu to Misty, and turning as the 4 guards positioned themselves around him and lead him into the fort. As the gates closed behind him, Ash looked around and tried to get a feel for the fort. The wall closed off about a third of the greenhouse's interior, and ringed in 10 wooden buildings. The tallest of the structures, a 3-story house with widely sloping eaves that grew narrower with each ascending tier, stood at the far end of the fort, protected by its own wall which had been integrated into the main defensive structure. The guards lead Ash towards the tiered structure, past no fewer than 24 armored men who stood at the ready all around the fort. Most of them glanced at Ash with only passing curiosity, though more than a few glared at him with suspicion. So she lives in a temple, Ash thought, looking up at the pagoda. Interesting. Stopping at the pagoda's gate, the soldier in the bronze mask stepped forward and knocked 4 times. A small door in the side of the gate opened and the 4 guards lead Ash through. Beyond the wall, lit by several torches set low to the ground, an expansive garden of meticulously arranged flowering bushes lined the stone walkway that ran to the wooden porch. Stepping over the threshold, Ash raised his hand to shield his eyes from the dazzlingly bright light of the temple's entry hall. As his sight adjusted, the young trainer looked around the hall, wondering for a moment if he had stepped into a temple, a palace, or some combination of the two. Everywhere, lavishly upholstered furniture sat neatly arranged around pieces of art and low tables. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling and lamps lined the walls, brightening the long room to something nearing noontime daylight and leaving Ash completely baffled by the gilded glitter of everything in sight. Lady Erika will see you in the rear garden, said the masked soldier. That way. He pointed straight down the hall, past the several closed doors on the adjacent walls, to the one open door on the opposite side of the room. Before Ash could thank them for the directions, the 4 soldiers turned and walked back to the porch, leaving Ash alone in the silent hall. Crossing the hall and walking to the open door, Ash cautiously stepped through and into a small garden protected by a wall of white stone and lit by shaded lanterns. Thin rows of flowering plants marked out a sitting area in the center of the garden where, atop a carpet of manicured grass, there sat a single low table and 2 women knelt around it. Hello, said the trainer, suddenly feeling completely out of place. Studying the 2 women more closely, he realized he recognized neither. Both wore pale kimonos of a golden cloth, ornamented with images of dragons and tigers, and held small saucers and cups of some steaming drink. One woman, by far the younger of the 2, looked up and acknowledged Ash with a nod. Immediately Ash recognized her and approached the table. You'll forgive my lack of decorum earlier, said Erika, setting her cup on the table and motioning for Ash to sit, which he did. You caught me unprepared for visitors. I'm just glad I showed up when I did,
said Ash, sitting cross-legged and resting his hands on the table.
I realize it's late and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but what's going on here?
He glanced to the side, noting the old woman sitting perfectly statuesque, hands folded over the handle of a sword resting in her lap.
Civil unrest, said Erika. It boiled over yesterday morning, but tension has been building for months. Over what?
Asked Ash.
A great many things, but we can speak on that later if you wish, after I've had a chance to rest,
said the young woman.
You said you were looking for me, so I'll assume there's business you want to discuss. About that,
said Ash, shifting to keep his leg from falling asleep.
What do you know about Team Rocket and their casino here?
Erika pressed her lips together and looked at the woman beside her.
Mr. Ketchum, did you journey here alone? No,
Ash shook his head.
Actually, my two companions are at the gate. The guards insisted they not come along. Tycho, go and see to Mr. Ketchum's companions. Get them rooms for the night,
ordered Erika, looking at the old woman.
And then order Captain Murat to station our guards with the police outside. Don't allow anyone in or out.
The old woman stood, bowed, and left without a word. As soon as the door to the garden shut, Erika sighed and reached up to rub her eyes.
This is all too bothersome to trouble with formality,
she said, pulling the pin from her hairdo and letting her atramentous locks spill down to her shoulders.
So I'm going to trust your reputation as an honorable man. Why don't you tell me whatever you think I should know?
She said. Ash shrugged.
All right, he said. To begin with, I'm investigating reports of Team Rocket's illegal activities. My sources in Fuchsia pointed me to Celadon with information of Rocket controlling the gaming center here and using it as a front and a base of operations. If that's true, then I can only imagine how much money it nets them. That's not exactly common knowledge,
Erika smiled.
So you already know. Please,
said the young woman.
I know my own town. Then you've got to know what they're up to,
said Ash. Erika's grin remained fixed and she shook her head.
Honestly, she said, I don't. I've of course heard rumors that they've operated some shady organizations in the past, but I've never seen any evidence for that here. To the best of my knowledge, Team Rocket has committed no crimes in any place that falls under my jurisdiction. If anything, they've done nothing but help the local community. So if I asked you for your permission to investigate the game corner?
Erika covered her mouth to stifle a yawn.
Pardon me, she answered. I'd inform you that I couldn't in good conscience allow it, even if there was a game corner left. What?
Ash leaned forward.
What do you mean by that? Exactly what I said. Team Rocket's casino burned down,
the gym leader explained.
When the riots began yesterday morning, one of the first places the mob looted was the game corner. They tore it apart looking for any money or food they could find. When things got out of hand with the security and the mayor and I sent in the police, it devolved into pure pandemonium. By the time it was all said and done, the game corner and half the surrounding block were on fire.
Ash took a second to process the information as Erika sat patiently.
But,
said the woman in the kimono,
that's not to say that there wouldn't be something left unharmed by the fire in one of the game corner's basements. If you really want to go looking for something, whatever it may be, perhaps we can strike a deal.
Ash looked up from the table.
And what would that involve?
Erika stood up and walked to one of the small glass windows set in the garden wall. After staring out for a second, she turned back to Ash and cleared her throat.
Haven't you noticed that for a Pokemon gym, there is a rather obvious lack of Pokemon here?
Asked Erika.
Why can't it ever be simple?
Asked Misty. Sighing and crossing her arms, she sat down on the bed's thick mattress and dropped back into the plush comforter.
Why does there always have to be a catch? Everybody wants something,
Ash shrugged.
We're not mercenaries,
Misty griped.
There's more to us that go to location A, complete task B and collect a reward. I know, but unfortunately we're not anywhere where we have much authority,
Ash reminded her.
Our hands are pretty much tied. So what does she want us to do?
Asked Brock, leaning against the wall of the expansive bedroom.
I can actually think of things a lot harder,
Ash said, shifting around.
A few months ago when the old mayor died, the city council appointed a new one to the office until the old one's term was up. Then, The new guy started instituting a bunch of laws about what trainers could and couldn't do in Celadon. Finally, it got to the point where having a Pokemon in the city limits was essentially illegal, and even Erika and her supporters had to leave theirs at the police station.
"We noticed," muttered Brock. Ash looked over at the older gym leader.
"I completely forgot," he said. "How did you get around that?" "I told the police officer trying to arrest me that I was a gym leader," said Brock. "When I said that I was not going to hand over my Pokemon, he said he'd make an exception. Misty just pulled out the charm."
He nodded to the redhead.
"I was charming, wasn't I?"
Misty grinned. Shaking his head for a second, Brock turned back to Ash.
"Anyway," he said. "What's the job?"
"Simple," Ash answered.
"Erika wants us to publicly denounce Mayor Vicar, and say that being the gym leader and the descendant of the old regent, Erika alone has the right to run Celadon."
"Ha!" Brock exclaimed.
"Simple. How about stupid? Gym leaders are supposed to protect the people, not rule them. We might make some big decisions, but it's always with the consent of whoever's really in charge. Pewter and Vermilion are two of the most stable cities in Kanto, and people know it,"
Ash went on.
"Celadon, to say the least, is not, and Erika thinks that if she has our backing that she could take over as both mayor and gym leader." "Her head's up her ass," said Brock, his voice rising. "If that spoiled little princess thinks that she's fit to take over just because she comes from a wealthy family, then she needs a lesson in reality." "In exchange," said the younger gym leader, "she's more than willing to give us her recommendation to the Elite Four and her permission to search the remains of the game corner. To top it all off, we stand to make a very powerful ally. I think it's a good deal." "So do I," said Misty, sitting up. "All we have to do is call some politician an idiot and be done with it." "And what if there's fallout?" asked Brock. "What if the police step in to stop her and it turns into a fight?" "Then we step in to stop them," Misty countered. "If none of the cops have Pokemon, then there's not a damn thing they can do to stop us." "And if they try?" Brock pressed. "If it turns into a fight, a lot of people could get hurt." "And it will be the mayor's fault for trying to deny Erika her right to rule," Misty said. "Or at least that will be the story. And once Erika's supporters have their Pokemon back, then it will really cement her in place as Celadon's leader. All she'll have to do is throw some favors around to keep the populace happy, and that'll be that."
Brock stared at Misty for a moment as Ash stepped back to let the two of them argue it out.
"Are you sure?" Brock said, glaring across the room at the girl on the bed. "You can call yourself Rocket?" "That's too far." Misty's voice dropped, growing as icy as her stare. "Erika's basically royalty. She's a proud brat, but that works to our advantage since it means that she'll be too proud for Team Rocket to try and control her. She won't need money or influence, which are the only two things Rocket could try to bribe her with. She'll think she's above them." "We already know from Janine that Rocket has agents in the city," argued Brock. "They might be able to control it even without Erika's help. If an angry mob just burned down their base, then it's safe to say that Team Rocket doesn't have a strong grip on the city," said Misty. "We should do whatever we can, as quickly as we can, to completely remove it from their control. If that means turning the city over to a bratty princess, then I say go for it. Whatever hurts Team Rocket." "What if she makes things even worse?" said Brock. "She could." He faltered. "Worse how?" Misty got up and crossed her arms. "Worse than being controlled by Team Rocket? We all saw how well that worked in Vermilion, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say even Erika couldn't fuck up worse than that." "It sets a dangerous precedent," said the older gym leader, tightly grasping his hands. "Gym leaders are supposed to support the government, not run it or try to overthrow it." "You're serious?" Misty muttered. "You seriously believe that? Brock, look at every city in Kanto. There's a city council or a mayor or something, sure, but everyone knows it's really the gym leaders who hold the real power anyway." "That's not true," said Brock. "Sure it is," Misty answered. "In Viridian, it's the gym that's sustaining the city by feeding the people since there's no other power to speak of. In Cerulean my sister has the fishing and construction industries, Cerulean's entire economy, bought and paid for. Ash," she gestured to the trainer, "ran Vermilion like a king. The city council did whatever he asked, whenever he asked, no questions asked. When Saffron's civil war cropped up and the city government completely collapsed, it was Sabrina who stepped in with her own private army to restore order. Even here, the only reason Erika lost her power is because she went along with the mayor and now she regrets it. Need I go on?" She could be working for Team Rocket,
said Brock, trying not to sound defeated.
Trust me, said Misty. If she were, she'd be a lot better off and wouldn't need us. Team Rocket likes to keep the gym leaders in their pockets very happy. This is a golden opportunity to strike while the iron is hot.
She went on.
And we need that recommendation.
Both of them going quiet, Brock had no rebuttal and Misty felt no need to press the issue. Misty's words seemed to echo silently off the walls and lavish furniture, until Ash cleared his throat and stepped into the center of the room. Sitting on the table and grabbing an apple from the bowl, he tossed it between his hands for a second.
Brock, I don't want to twist your arm, he said. If you don't want to do this then please, don't feel like you have to.
Brock sighed.
I don't want to support the rise of a monarch.
Misty shook her head and stepped up next to Ash.
Kanto is ruled by monarchs, she said. Erika would just bypass the facade of democracy and be honest about it.
Ash glanced at Misty and patted her on the arm as Brock put his hands on his knees and forced himself up to his feet.
I get it,
he said.
I don't like it, but I get it.
He took a deep breath and held up his hand as Ash tossed him the apple. Brock caught it and looked at the fruit.
If you're in, so am I.
End of chapter.